Welcome back to Cinemax. Today we are breaking down Wake Up Dead Man, the third film in the Knives Out mystery series, written and directed by Rian Johnson. This one came out on Netflix in December 2025, and it stars Daniel Craig returning as the famous detective Benoit Blanc, alongside Josh O'Connor, Glenn Close, Josh Brolin, and Jeremy Renner. This is easily the darkest and most emotionally heavy entry in the Knives Out series so far. It looks like a fun murder mystery on the surface, but underneath it is really a story about faith, greed, guilt, and what it truly means to be a good person. So let us get into the full story from the very beginning, all the way through to the ending, and we will explain every single thing that happens. The movie opens by introducing us to a man named Father Judd Duplessis, played by Josh O'Connor. He is a Catholic priest, but not your typical soft-spoken, gentle kind of priest. Judd is a former boxer. He is rough around the edges. He speaks directly and sometimes harshly. He does not sugarcoat anything, not even in his sermons. And this gets him into trouble almost immediately. Before the main story begins, we learn that Judd got into a physical fight with a deacon at his previous church. The deacon was being rude and disrespectful, and Judd, with his boxing instinct still very much alive inside him, hit the man. His church decided they could not keep him there after that incident, so they reassigned him. They sent him to a small parish in upstate New York called Our Lady of Perpetual Fortitude. When Judd arrives at this new church, the place already has a heavy and uncomfortable feeling to it. The first person he officially meets is the head of the church, Monsignor Wix, played by Josh Brolin. Wix is a big, imposing man. He carries himself like someone who is completely used to being in charge. He is confident, controlling, and not particularly warm. He tells Judd how things are going to work and makes it very clear who is the boss here. Judd tries to go along with it, even though something about Wix makes him uneasy from the very first moment. There is also a woman at the church named Martha Delacroix, played by Glenn Close. Martha is the church's secretary, and she has been attending this parish since she was a very young girl. She is deeply devoted, extremely quiet, and keeps mostly to herself. In one of the film's early funny moments, Judd is standing in the middle of a room having a conversation, and suddenly notices that Martha has been standing just a few feet away from him the entire time, completely still and silent without him ever noticing. She is easy to overlook, and the movie uses this detail in a very clever way later on. The other key people at the church include a groundskeeper named Samson Holt, played by Thomas Hayden Church, who is a big, quiet man who takes care of the property. There is a local doctor named Nat Sharp, played by Jeremy Renner, who is friendly with Wix and is trusted within the church's inner circle. And there is a man named Cy Draven, who shows up later making a very bold claim about his connection to the church's history. Before we go further into the present-day story, we need to understand the history of this church, because it is the key to absolutely everything that happens in the film. The church was originally founded by a man named Reverend Prentice Wix, who is Jefferson Wix's grandfather. Prentice was a deeply complicated man. He had a daughter named Grace, and he kept Grace at the church for years by promising her an inheritance. He told her that when he died, she would receive a fortune that belonged to the church. Grace believed him, and she stayed. She gave years of her life to this place based entirely on that promise. But when Prentice died, the fortune was nowhere to be found. There was no money, no property, nothing of value that anyone could point to. Grace was devastated and furious. She had given up so much of her life based on what turned out to be a lie. In her grief and anger, she ransacked the entire church looking for whatever her father might have hidden. During this search, she destroyed the church's large crucifix. And then she left and never came back. Jefferson Wix, who took over as the head of the church after Prentice died, never repaired the crucifix. That missing crucifix is one of the first things you notice when you walk into the church. It sits there as a visible symbol of everything broken in this place. A wound that was never healed and never dealt with. This history is where everything begins. Back to the present. Judd settles into life at the church and starts giving sermons. And his sermons are something else entirely. They are blunt. They are uncomfortable. They call out hypocrisy. They challenge people rather than comfort them. Some members of the congregation love him immediately because of this, but most of the people are not sure what to make of him. The congregation slowly starts to thin out. Only a small, loyal core continues to show up consistently for his services. Wix does not like this one bit. He wants the church full. He wants the congregation happy and cooperative. Judd's approach is the complete opposite of what Wix wants. The tension between the two men builds quietly in the background of the film's early section. Then comes Good Friday. It is one of the most sacred days in the Catholic calendar. The church is prepared and the service is underway. And then, in a storage closet near the pulpit, Monsignor Jefferson Wix is found dead. He has been stabbed. The murder weapon is particularly damaging for Judd. The knife used to kill Wix was made from a metal adornment, specifically a devil's head decoration, from a lamp inside a bar near the church. And Judd himself had previously stolen that exact adornment from the bar in a moment of frustration and thrown it through one of the church windows. So the weapon used to kill Wix came directly from something Judd had handled. On top of that, everyone knew Judd and Wix had a difficult relationship. The conclusion people jump to is obvious. Judd looks extremely guilty. Judd becomes the prime suspect. The local police chief, a woman named Geraldine Scott, leads the official investigation. She is sharp and professional and determined to find answers. But she knows this case is complicated, so she calls in outside help. She contacts the famous private detective Benoit Blanc, played by Daniel Craig, and Blanc arrives with his usual quiet confidence and his eye for the details that everyone else misses. This is where the dynamic of the film really comes alive. Blanc looks at the situation and almost immediately decides that Judd did not do this. He cannot yet explain who did, but his instincts tell him the obvious answer is wrong. So instead of treating Judd like a suspect, Blanc recruits him as his partner. He wants Judd to help investigate. Geraldine is not pleased about this at all and thinks it is reckless. But Blanc insists, and so the unlikely pair of a southern gentleman detective and a hot-tempered Irish priest begin working together to figure out who really killed Monsignor Wix. They start by interviewing people and digging into Wix's recent behaviour. One of the first things they discover is that Wix had recently done something very strange. He had called a private meeting with his closest followers and essentially pushed all of them away. He dismissed them. For a man who had spent years carefully building loyal followers inside his church, this was bizarre behaviour. Why would Wix suddenly want to distance himself from everyone around him? Then, Cy Draven comes forward with a dramatic claim. He says that Wix had recently discovered the location of his grandfather Prentice's hidden fortune, and Cy says that Wix was planning to use that money not for the church, but for his own political career. Cy also drops a personal bombshell, claiming to be the illegitimate son of Jefferson Wix, which he says makes him the rightful heir to the family fortune. This adds another layer of chaos to an already messy situation. Judd, feeling overwhelmed, steps back from the investigation for a time to focus on his own ministry and the people who still need him. But the story doesn't let him rest for long. That same night, Judd is at the church and sees something that stops him completely. He sees a figure that looks exactly like Monsignor Wix walking out of the mausoleum where Wix was buried just that day. The figure of Wix is embracing the groundskeeper Samson out in the dark churchyard. Judd cannot believe what he is seeing. He blinks, he looks again, and then he chases after them. But before he can get close, Judd is knocked unconscious from behind. He does not see who hit him. When he wakes up, he is lying on the ground, and right next to him is the body of Samson Holt, the groundskeeper. Samson is dead. Now, Judd appears guilty of not one, but 2 deaths. Things are looking very bad for him. Blanc tells Judd to stay calm and not hand himself over to the police yet, because Blanc has noticed something important. He went back to the bar where the devil's head adornment had been stolen and discovered that a second adornment from the same lamp had also gone missing. But not taken by Judd. This second one was taken by Dr. Nat Sharp. This is a huge discovery. If Nat stole a second adornment, it means the murder weapon that made Judd look guilty could have been deliberately planted. Someone could have set the whole scene up to frame him. Blanc and Judd follow the evidence to Nat Sharp's house, and what they find inside is deeply disturbing. There are 2 bodies dissolving in a bathtub full of acid. One is Nat himself. The other is Monsignor Wix, so the body buried in the mausoleum was never really Wix. The figure Judd saw walking in the churchyard was not a ghost, and it was not a miracle. But what exactly was it? And who killed Nat? And who killed Samson? And how did all of this happen? The next morning, Blanc gathers the congregation inside the church and begins laying out what he has figured out. And his explanation is extraordinary in its detail. Here is what Blanc believes happened. Nat Sharp killed Monsignor Wix, Nat had regular access to Wix and was completely trusted by him. On the day of the murder, Nat slipped tranquilizers into Wix's private flask, slowly drugging him. When Wix became disoriented and collapsed in the storage closet, Nat used the second devil's head adornment he had stolen to stab him. He then arranged the evidence to point back to Judd's stolen adornment. He pretended to discover and inspect the body while having just committed the murder himself. Blanc explains all of this clearly, but then he says something that surprises the room. He admits there are parts of the case he still cannot fully explain. Specifically, he cannot account for the apparent resurrection of Wix or what Judd actually witnessed in the churchyard. He concedes that gaps remain, and he is not ready yet to make a complete final accusation. This is unusual for Benoit Blanc. In the previous Knives Out films, he always had the complete and airtight answer, but here he openly admits he does not have the whole picture, and that admission is what opens the door for the truth to finally walk through. Just as it looks like Judd is about to be arrested for Samson's death, the church doors open and Martha Delacroix walks in. Quiet, steady, easy to overlook Martha, the woman who has stood in the background from the very beginning. She tells everyone she needs to confess, and what she reveals changes everything. Martha starts by telling the secret that has been buried under this church for decades. It is about Prentice Wix and the missing fortune. It turns out Prentice hid his fortune in the most unexpected way imaginable. He swallowed a diamond, a single, extremely valuable diamond that represented the entirety of what the church was worth. He swallowed it and took that secret to his grave. Literally. The fortune that Grace had been promised was never in the church building at all. It was inside Prentice's body. And when he was buried in the mausoleum, the diamond went with him. Jefferson Wix had eventually figured this out. He went through his grandfather's old papers and letters and put the pieces together. He realized the diamond was inside the remains in the mausoleum, and he made a plan to retrieve it. He wanted to use the money to fund his own political career. He was going to quietly take the diamond and walk away from the church and everyone in it. But before he could do any of that, he made a fatal mistake. He told Martha his plan. Martha had been devoted to this church her whole life. She had watched Grace suffer because of the broken promise of the inheritance. She had seen what the greed of the Wix family had already done to this community. And now Jefferson Wix was planning to take the last remaining treasure of the church and use it for himself, abandoning everyone again. Martha could not allow that, so she put together a plan of her own. She brought in two people she trusted, Nat Sharp, the doctor, and Samson Holt, the groundskeeper. Together, the three of them came up with a scheme. They would stage the death and apparent resurrection of Monsignor Wix. They would make it look like he had died and then miraculously come back to life. A resurrection story inside a Catholic church at Easter time would be powerfully meaningful to the congregation and would restore enormous faith in the community. More importantly, it would stop Wix from leaving quietly with the diamond, because a man who has just supposedly risen from the dead cannot simply disappear with church property. So Nat carried out the actual killing of Wix, which matches the explanation Blanc already gave. But Nat had his own private plan running beneath all of this. Once Wix was dead and the diamond was within reach, Nat decided he wanted it for himself. He did not want to share it with Martha or Samson. He wanted to take everything. So Nat killed Samson. He murdered the groundskeeper to silence him and to frame Judd in the process. Two problems eliminated at once. Samson could no longer tell anyone about the plan, and Judd would take the blame. Then Nat turned his attention to Martha. She was the only remaining person who knew the full truth and could connect him to everything. He tried to kill her, but Martha was ready. She poisoned Nat Sharp with a cup of coffee that she had laced with pentobarbital, a powerful drug. Nat drank it and died. Martha had protected herself and stopped the man who had turned their plan into something she never intended. But then Martha also drank the remaining poisoned coffee herself. She knew what she had done. She had set all of this in motion. She had never meant for Samson to die. She had never meant for Judd to be framed for crimes he did not commit. But those things happened anyway because of choices she made. The guilt of what happened to Samson, a man who trusted her and helped her and died because of her plan, was something she couldn't carry forward. And so she chose to end her own life alongside Nat's. Now comes the moment that sets this film apart from every other Knives Out movie. Blanc looks at Martha standing there in front of the congregation. He can see that she is already dying, The poison is working through her body. He has now solved the case completely. He knows the full truth. He could stand up right now and expose every detail publicly, laying everything out in a dramatic climactic reveal the way he has done in the previous 2 films. But he does not do that. Instead, Blanc pretends he cannot fully solve the case. He tells the room he is stumped. He steps deliberately to the side and lets Martha do what she needs to do. Because what Martha needs in this moment is not a public accusation or a courtroom or handcuffs. What she needs is a priest. With the time she has left, Martha turns to Judd. She confesses everything to him personally, the way a dying person confesses to their priest. She tells him all of it, and she asks for forgiveness. Not just for herself, but for Grace Wix too. Because in her final moments, Martha realizes that Grace was never the villain of this story. Grace was a victim. She was a woman who had been lied to and exploited by her own father, kept at a church her entire adult life on a false promise, and then had whatever she was owed stolen from her again by the next generation of Wix men. Martha asked Judd to understand Grace, to forgive her, to stop seeing her as the woman who destroyed the crucifix and start seeing her as a woman who was broken by people who should have protected her. Judd, despite everything he has been through in the past several days, despite being framed, suspected, nearly arrested, and dragged through one of the worst experiences of his life, kneels down next to Martha and performs the last rites of the Catholic Church. He is a priest. This is who he is. This is what he does. He holds her hand as she dies. When she is gone, the diamond falls from her hand onto the floor of the church. The last part of the film takes place 1 year later. Judd is reopening the church, but it has a new name now. It is no longer called Our Lady of Perpetual Fortitude. Judd has renamed it Our Lady of Perpetual Grace, named after Grace Wix, the woman who was wronged, the woman Martha asked him to forgive, the woman the whole story quietly started with, long before any of the murders ever happened. Most of the former congregation has moved on. The scandal and the deaths and the shattered trust have changed things permanently for many of the people who used to sit in those pews. Cy Dreven, who claimed to be Jefferson Wix's illegitimate son, has threatened to sue if the diamond is returned to anyone other than him. The community around the church, fully aware of what the diamond represents and what it cost in human lives to bring the truth out, decides collectively to say nothing. Nobody confirms or denies anything publicly. And then, in the very final moment of the film, the camera reveals where the diamond ended up. It is hidden inside the new crucifix, the one Judd placed in the church to replace the one Grace destroyed years ago in her grief. The diamond, the source of every bit of suffering and greed and death in this entire story, has been placed inside the most sacred symbol of faith and sacrifice the church has. It is not sold. It is not auctioned off. It is not handed to any heir. It is just quietly there inside the cross where it cannot be used to hurt anyone ever again. Now, let us talk about what this film is really saying underneath everything. Wake Up Dead Man is the darkest film in the Knives Out series. The first film was a clever puzzle about family greed, played with a lot of wit and entertainment. Glass Onion was a sharp and funny commentary about wealth and ego. This third film is different from both of them. It is quieter, more painful, and far more interested in asking genuine questions about faith, forgiveness, and what we actually owe to each other. Monsignor Jefferson Wix represents everything that goes wrong when religion is used as a tool for personal power. He used his position of spiritual authority to keep people loyal to him personally, not to God, or to their community, or to anything larger than himself. The moment he found what he was looking for, he was ready to walk away from every person who had trusted him without a second thought. Martha Delacroix represents the opposite of that, but in a deeply tragic way. She loved the church so completely and so purely that she was willing to commit serious wrongs to protect it. Her devotion was real, her faith was genuine, but her actions set off a chain of events that destroyed innocent people. And she knew it. She couldn't survive that knowledge. Judd Duplantis is the moral heart of the entire film. He is not perfect by any measure. He is angry and sometimes cruel and makes bad decisions. But when the moment truly matters, when a dying woman needs compassion and a community needs someone to lead without judgment, Judd rises completely to it. He names the new church after the woman whose actions made everything harder for everyone, because he understands that Grace was not wrong. She was betrayed, and her pain was real, and it was justified. Benoit Blanc's role in this film is also unlike anything he has done before. In the previous two Knives Out movies, Blanc's job was to expose the truth loudly and dramatically in front of everyone. Here, his job is to know the truth and then decide what the right thing to do with it actually is. He solves the case completely, but he chooses compassion over the satisfaction of the big reveal. He steps aside and lets Martha die with her dignity as a confessor rather than a criminal. That one small, quiet choice is the most important thing Blanc does in the entire movie. And the diamond. The diamond holds the whole film together as a symbol. It has been buried inside a dead man's body all along. The fortune that Grace was promised sitting completely out of reach inside the mausoleum for decades. When it finally comes out into the world, it causes nothing but betrayal and death. And at the end, Judd does not try to use it for anything productive or sell it to fund the church's future. He just hides it inside the new crucifix. Because some things carry too much damage to ever be used cleanly. Sometimes the best thing you can do with a problem is to contain it, remove it from everyone's reach, and move forward without it. Wake Up Dead Man is a movie that asks whether faith can survive when the institution carrying it is rotten from the inside. And its answer is yes, but only if the people within that institution choose humanity over rules and forgiveness over punishment. Judd does not fix the church by exposing every secret and bringing every guilty person to justice. He fixes it by starting over with a new name and new doors, open to new people who never had anything to do with the old wounds. That is Wake Up Dead Man, a murder mystery that is really about whether goodness can survive inside a broken and corrupt institution. A story about a priceless diamond worth killing for that turns out to mean very little once you see what it costs in human lives. And a story about a former boxer turned priest who turns out to be exactly what this community needed, not despite his roughness and his anger, but partly because of it. That is it for today's recap here on Cinemax. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next video. We will see you in the next one.